The wailing of 6-month-old Emma echoed through the small cabin as Nathan Adams rocked her in his tired arms, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the photograph of his late wife Sarah. Outside, the merciless Montana winter of 1876 howled with as much ferocity as the grief that had taken residence in his heart these past 3 months. "Hush now, little one," Nathan whispered, his voice hoarse from lack of use. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and he hadn't spoken to another adult since the day he'd buried Sarah. The influenza that had swept through the territory had taken her in just 4 days, leaving him alone with their infant daughter and a ranch that was slowly falling apart around him. Emma's cries intensified. Nathan bounced her gently, panic rising in his chest. Sarah had always known exactly what to do when Emma cried. He was still learning, still fumbling through each day, praying he wouldn't fail this tiny life that depended on him entirely. "I know you miss her too," he murmured, pressing his lips against Emma's forehead. "I know, sweetheart." The cabin was a mess, dishes piled in the basin, laundry half done, the fire barely keeping the bitter cold at bay. Nathan had been a competent rancher, but domestic duties had always been Sarah's domain. Now, he struggled to manage both while caring for Emma. His cattle were getting thin, the barn needed repairs, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd had more than 2 hours of continuous sleep. As Emma's cries finally began to subside, Nathan heard something that made him freeze, the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Visitors were rare in this remote part of the territory, especially during winter. Instinctively, he reached for the rifle he kept propped beside the rocking chair. The knock that came moments later was soft, hesitant. Nathan placed Emma in her cradle and moved cautiously toward the door, rifle in hand. "Who's there?" he called out, positioning himself to the side of the door. "Abigail Andrews, sir," came a woman's voice, clear despite the howling wind. "From over at Widow Parker's place. I've brought some bread and—" There was a pause. "Well, I thought you might need some help." Nathan hesitated. He'd heard that Martha Parker had taken in a young woman from back east several months ago, but he'd never met her. Still, in these parts, turning away a visitor in such weather would be unconscionable. He unlatched the door and pulled it open, keeping the rifle visible but lowered. The woman standing on his porch was bundled in a heavy coat, a woolen scarf wrapped around her head. She held a covered basket in gloved hands, and behind her, a sturdy bay mare stood patiently in the swirling snow. "Miss Andrews," Nathan said, his voice rough from disuse. She pulled down her scarf, revealing a face that was striking in its quiet determination rather than conventional beauty. Her eyes, a deep brown that reminded Nathan of the rich soil in spring, met his directly. "Mr. Adams," she said, "I hope I'm not intruding. Mrs. Parker mentioned you were alone with the baby, and with this storm." She gestured to the basket. "I brought some fresh bread, stew, and a few other things that might help." As if on cue, Emma began to cry again. Nathan glanced back at the cradle, conflict evident on his face. "Please come in," he said finally, stepping aside. "It's no place for anyone to be standing out in this cold." Abigail crossed the threshold, stamping snow from her boots before entering fully. She took in the state of the cabin with a quick, assessing glance that held no judgment. "Let me see to your horse first," Nathan said, reaching for his coat. "I've already tied her in the shelter of your porch," Abigail replied. "She'll be fine for a short while. Your daughter needs you more right now." Nathan nodded gratefully and moved to the cradle, lifting Emma into his arms. "She's been fussy all day. I can't seem to figure out what she needs." Abigail set her basket on the table and removed her outer garments. Beneath the heavy coat, she wore a simple blue dress, practical for the frontier but well tended. She approached slowly. "May I?" she asked, extending her arms. Nathan hesitated only briefly before handing Emma to her. The transition was awkward. He wasn't used to passing his daughter to anyone else, but Abigail handled the baby with confident hands. "Hello, little one," she said softly, cradling Emma against her shoulder. "What's troubling you today, To Nathan's astonishment, Emma's cries began to soften almost immediately. Abigail walked slowly around the room, patting the baby's back in a gentle rhythm. "How did you do that?" Nathan asked, genuine amazement in his voice. Abigail smiled. "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed. Sometimes babies just need a different set of arms." She glanced around the cabin. "When did she eat last?" Nathan ran a hand through his hair, trying to remember. "A couple hours ago, I think. The milk from town isn't lasting as well as it should." "She might be hungry again," Abigail suggested. "And cow's milk isn't always easy for babies to digest. Have you tried goat's milk?" Nathan shook his head. "Wouldn't know where to get it. Mrs. Parker has goats. I could bring some tomorrow, if you'd allow it." As Emma quieted against Abigail's shoulder, Nathan felt a weight lift from his own. For the first time in months, someone else was sharing his burden, even if just for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Abigail met his gaze. "Because no one should have to face the hardest things alone, Mr. Adams. I know something about that myself." While Abigail continued to soothe Emma, Nathan moved to the fireplace, adding wood and stoking the flames until warmth began to seep back into the room. He then cleared space at the table, embarrassed by the clutter. "I apologize for the state of things," he said, gathering dirty dishes. "No need," Abigail replied. "I came unannounced." She looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "Where shall I put her?" Nathan led her to the small cradle near the fire. Abigail laid Emma down with such gentleness that the baby barely stirred. She tucked the blanket around the infant and straightened. "Now," she said, turning to the basket she'd brought, "let's get something warm inside you. When did you last eat a proper meal, Mr. Adams?" Nathan couldn't remember. The days had blurred together in a haze of grief and exhaustion. He watched as Abigail moved with quiet efficiency, finding bowls and spoons despite the disarray. She ladled thick stew from a container in her basket and set it on the table. "Sit," she instructed, her tone gentle but brooking no argument. Nathan obeyed, suddenly aware of how famished he was. The stew was rich with vegetables and chunks of beef, still warm from Mrs. Parker's kitchen. He took a bite and nearly groaned at the flavor. "Thank you," he said after several mouthfuls. "I didn't realize how hungry I was." Abigail nodded, satisfaction in her eyes. "Mrs. Parker was worried. She said you haven't been to town in weeks." "Haven't had the time," Nathan admitted. "Or the heart for it. Mrs. Parker told me about your wife," Abigail said softly. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Nathan set down his spoon, the familiar wave of grief washing over him. "Sarah was everything to this place. To me." "I can see that," Abigail replied. "She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was." Nathan looked around the cabin, seeing it through fresh eyes, the quilts Sarah had made hanging on the wall, her books on the shelf, the rocking chair where she nursed Emma. "This was her dream, you know. This ranch. She grew up in a mining town, always wanted open spaces and horses." Abigail listened, her expression attentive. There was something in her manner that invited confidence without demanding it. "What about you, Miss Andrews?" Nathan asked, suddenly wanting to shift the focus away from his grief. "Mrs. Parker mentioned you're from back east?" "Philadelphia," Abigail confirmed. "I came west 6 months ago to teach at the school in town, but when I arrived they'd already filled the position. Mrs. Parker kindly took me in while I figure out my next steps." "You're a teacher?" Abigail nodded. "I was. Though out here, I'm finding other skills are more valuable. Mrs. Parker has taught me about gardening, preserving food, even basic veterinary care for her livestock. No family back east wondering about you." A shadow crossed her face. "My father remarried after my mother died. His new wife had little use for another woman in the house, especially one who spoke her mind too freely. When the teaching opportunity arose out west, it seemed providential." Nathan recognized the careful omission in her story, the pain tucked between the words. They were both practiced at it, it seemed. As they talked, he found himself noticing things about her, the slight southern lilt in her voice that emerged when she was less guarded, the capable way her hands moved as she broke bread for them both, the intelligence in her eyes. By the time they'd finished eating, the storm outside had intensified. Nathan went to the window, frowning at the wide-out conditions. "You can't ride back to Mrs. Parker's in this," he said. "It's too dangerous." Abigail joined him at the window, concern etching her features. "Mrs. Parker will worry." "She'd worry more if you got lost in this," Nathan countered. "You'll have to stay until it passes." He saw her hesitation, the propriety instilled in her warring with practical necessity. "I can sleep in the barn," he offered. "You and Emma can have the cabin." Abigail shook her head firmly. "You'll do no such thing. It's freezing out there. This is your home, Mr. Adams. I'm the intruder. I can make a bed by the fire." They eventually compromised. Nathan would keep his bed in the small adjoining room where Emma's cradle was, and Abigail would take the single bed in the main room that had once been for guests. As Nathan prepared to retire for the night, he realized with a start that he felt something besides grief for the first time in months. Relief. The presence of another adult, someone to share the responsibility of Emma even for a night, was like coming up for air after being underwater. "Miss Andrews," he said, pausing at his bedroom door. "I'm grateful you came." Abigail, who was tucking blankets around herself on the bed, looked up. "Sleep well, Mr. Adams. I'll be here if Emma wakes." For the first time since Sarah's death, Nathan slept through the night. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window, and the unfamiliar sound of humming. For a disorienting moment he thought Sarah was back, that the past months had been a terrible dream. Then reality settled in, and he remembered his visitor. Nathan rose quickly, running a hand through his hair and over his beard. He checked Emma's cradle empty. A momentary panic seized him until he stepped into the main room and saw Abigail by the cookstove, Emma contentedly cradled in one arm, while she stirred something with her free hand. "Good morning," she said, looking up with a smile. "I hope you don't mind. Emma was awake early, and I thought you could use the rest." The cabin was transformed. The dishes were washed and put away, the floor swept, the clutter organized. A pot of something fragrant bubbled on the stove, and fresh coffee waited on the table. "You didn't have to do all this," Nathan said, embarrassed yet deeply grateful. "I wanted to," Abigail replied simply. "Besides, Emma has been excellent company, haven't you, little one?" She smiled down at the baby, who gazed up at her with wide, curious eyes. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a crystalline world of snow and blue sky. Nathan moved to the window, assessing the conditions. "The trail to Mrs. Parker's should be passable by midday," he said. "I can escort you back then." Abigail nodded, a flicker of something disappointment crossing her face. "Of course. She'll be worried." They shared breakfast, and Nathan found himself reluctant for the meal to end. Conversation with Abigail came easily. She was well-read but practical, opinionated but respectful of differing views. When she spoke of her teaching, her face lit with passion. "The territory needs good teachers," Nathan remarked. "Shame about the position in town." "Yes, well," Abigail said, bouncing Emma gently as the baby began to fuss. "Perhaps something else will open up. Until then, I'm learning valuable skills from Mrs. Parker." As they prepared for the journey to the Parker homestead, Nathan found himself making an impulsive offer. "Miss Andrews, that is, Emma and I, we could use some help around here. Just until you find a teaching position. Room and board, of course, and wages." Abigail stilled, her hands pausing in the act of wrapping Emma in a blanket. "You're offering me a job? As what, exactly?" Nathan hadn't thought it through. "A housekeeper? No, that's not right. A helper? With Emma and the house, while I tend to the ranch. It's falling behind, and I can't." His voice caught. I can't do it all alone. Abigail studied him for a long moment. Mr. Adams, while I appreciate the offer, I'm not sure it would be appropriate. A single woman living in the home of a widower? People would talk. People always talk, Nathan said dismissively. But if it concerns you, perhaps you could continue staying with Mrs. Parker and come here during the days? At least until we find a more permanent solution. Abigail considered this, her gaze moving between Nathan and Emma. Let me discuss it with Mrs. Parker. She's been very kind to me, and I wouldn't want to seem ungrateful. Nathan nodded, trying to hide his eagerness for her agreement. It wasn't just the practical help he needed, though that was significant. It was the way her presence had already brought a sense of order and peace to the chaos of his life. They rode to Mrs. Parker's in companionable silence, Emma securely bundled against Abigail on her horse. The winter landscape sparkled around them, the snow crunching beneath the horses' hooves. Martha Parker was indeed worried but relieved to see them both safe. A robust woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner, she welcomed them into her warm kitchen with hot tea and knowing looks between Nathan and Abigail that made them both uncomfortable. So you've met our Nathan finally, Mrs. Parker said to Abigail. Been telling her about you for months, she added to Nathan. Thought you two might have something in common. Martha, Abigail protested, her cheeks coloring slightly. Don't Martha me, girl. I'm too old for pretense. Man needs help, you need work. Simple as that. Nathan explained his proposal for Abigail to help with Emma and the household during the days. Mrs. Parker listened, nodding thoughtfully. Sensible enough for now, she pronounced. Though mark my words, riding back and forth every day will get tiresome come spring thaw when the work really begins. Before they left, Mrs. Parker insisted on sending Nathan home with goat's milk for Emma, preserved vegetables, and more of her bread. Abigail promised to return the next day to begin working. As Nathan rode home alone with Emma, the baby contentedly sleeping against his chest, he felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief at the prospect of help, certainly. But also something he hadn't expected: anticipation. For the first time since Sarah's death, he was looking forward to tomorrow. The days fell into a rhythm. Abigail would arrive early in the morning, sometimes bringing supplies from Mrs. Parker. She would care for Emma while Nathan tended to the ranch, then tackle the household chores with efficient grace. She introduced small changes: gradually better organization of supplies, more nutritious meals, a schedule for Emma that brought predictability to their days. Nathan found himself watching her often: the gentle way she handled Emma, her determination when facing a difficult task, the intelligence that shone in her eyes when they discussed books or current events in the evenings before she returned to Mrs. Parker's. Winter slowly gave way to the first tentative signs of spring. The arrangement was working well, but as Mrs. Parker had predicted, the daily travel was becoming impractical. The spring thaw turned the trails to mud, and Nathan worried about Abigail making the journey alone. Perhaps, he suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, Emma sleeping peacefully in her cradle, we should reconsider the arrangements. Abigail looked up from her mending. Oh? The travel is becoming dangerous. And with spring planting and the new calves coming. He hesitated. It would be more practical if you stayed here. Abigail set down her sewing. Mr. Adams, Nathan, he interrupted. After all this time, please call me Nathan. She smiled slightly. Nathan, then. You know as well as I do that it would cause talk if I were to live here. What if, he said carefully, there was a way to silence the talk? Abigail's eyes widened slightly as his meaning became clear. Are you suggesting a marriage of convenience? Nathan clarified quickly. For Emma's sake, and for the practical running of the ranch. No expectations beyond that. He saw the conflict in her expression: consideration of the practical benefits warring with other concerns. We hardly know each other, she said finally. We've spent nearly every day together for 3 months, Nathan countered. I'd say we know each other better than many couples when they marry. And what of Sarah? Abigail asked gently. It's only been 6 months. Nathan looked toward the photograph of his late wife on the mantel. Sarah would want Emma to have a mother. And she would want me to keep the ranch going, our dream. She wasn't one for sentimentality at the expense of survival. You're not in love with me, Nathan, Abigail said softly. No, he admitted. But I respect you deeply. I admire your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. That's more than many marriages begin with. Abigail was quiet for a long moment. I need time to think about this, she said finally. It's not a decision to make lightly. Of course. Nathan agreed, suddenly anxious that he'd overstepped. Take all the time you need. The next day, Abigail did not come to the ranch. Nathan tried not to worry, telling himself she needed space to consider his proposal. But as the hours passed with no sign of her, concern gnawed at him. By afternoon, he couldn't wait any longer. Bundling Emma warmly, he rode to Mrs. Parker's homestead, only to find Abigail was not there. Rode into town this morning, Mrs. Parker informed him. Said she had business at the telegraph office. Should be back by supper. Nathan returned home, unsettled. What business could Abigail have at the telegraph office? Was she contacting someone back east? Perhaps family who might help her return. The thought of Abigail leaving created a hollow feeling in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. It wasn't just the practical help he would miss, it was her. Her laugh when Emma did something amusing, her quiet companionship in the evenings, the way she challenged his thinking on everything from politics to ranching methods. That night, as he rocked Emma to sleep, Nathan finally admitted to himself what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Abigail Andrews. The realization terrified him. He had not expected to love again after Sarah. Had not wanted to. Love meant vulnerability, the possibility of devastating loss. Yet here it was, undeniable and inconvenient. The next morning, Abigail arrived as usual, giving no indication that anything was different. She took Emma from him with her customary smile, and Nathan hesitated, wanting to ask about her trip to town but afraid of the answer. Finally, as they shared lunch, he could contain his curiosity no longer. Mrs. Parker mentioned you went to town yesterday. Abigail nodded. Yes, I had some correspondence to attend to. I see, Nathan said, trying to keep his voice neutral. Family matters? In a manner of speaking. Abigail hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper. I received this letter last week from the Territorial Superintendent of Education. Nathan took the letter, scanning its contents. It was an offer of a teaching position at a new school being established in Helena, starting in the fall. This is wonderful, he said, forcing enthusiasm into his voice despite the sinking feeling in his stomach. Congratulations. Thank you, Abigail said. It's what I came west for, after all. Nathan handed the letter back, trying to mask his disappointment. Helena is a growing city. You'll have opportunities there you wouldn't find in our small community. Yes, Abigail agreed. Which is why I went to the telegraph office yesterday to decline the position. Nathan stared at her. You. What? I declined, Abigail repeated. I sent my regrets and recommended another teacher I know from Philadelphia who might be interested. But why? Nathan asked, confusion evident in his voice. This is the opportunity you've been waiting for. Abigail met his gaze steadily. Because I've found something else I value more. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest. And what might that be? This place, Abigail said, her voice soft but sure. Emma. The work we're doing here. She paused. You. The silence between them hummed with unspoken feelings. Abigail. Nathan began, then stopped, uncertain how to proceed. When you proposed a marriage of convenience, she continued, I needed to be sure of my own feelings. I didn't want to enter into such an arrangement if there was any chance I might later regret declining the teaching position. And now? Now I know that what I feel for you and Emma is far more than convenience or practicality." Her voice wavered slightly. "I've come to care for you both deeply." Nathan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I feel the same. When I thought you might leave," he shook his head, "I realized it wasn't just your help I would miss." "So," Abigail said, a smile playing at her lips, "does your proposal still stand? Though perhaps under slightly different terms?" Nathan stood, still holding her hand, and moved around the table to kneel beside her chair. "Abigail Andrews, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Not for convenience, but because I believe we could build a good life together, a life with affection, respect, and, God willing, love." Tears glistened in Abigail's eyes. "Yes, Nathan Adams. I will." They were married 2 weeks later in Mrs. Parker's front parlor, with the widow herself and the local preacher as witnesses. Emma, dressed in a gown Abigail had sewn for the occasion, gurgled happily in Mrs. Parker's arms during the brief ceremony. Their wedding night was tender and uncertain, both of them navigating new territory with gentle consideration for each other's feelings. Nathan had feared he might feel disloyal to Sarah, but instead found that his love for his first wife existed alongside his growing feelings for Abigail, different, but no less real. Spring unfolded into summer, and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Abigail proved to have a natural affinity for gardening, expanding the kitchen plot to include vegetables and herbs that supplemented their meals. She also revealed an unexpected talent for bookkeeping, organizing the ranch's finances with a precision that had been lacking. Emma thrived under Abigail's loving care, taking her first steps across the cabin floor and calling both Mama and Papa with equal enthusiasm. Though Abigail was careful never to replace Sarah in Emma's life, the photograph remained on the mantel, and they spoke of Sarah often. She embraced her role as Emma's mother with wholehearted devotion. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Abigail turned to Nathan with a hesitant smile. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her abdomen. "We're going to have a child of our own come winter." Nathan's eyes widened, joy and wonder spreading across his face. He pulled her into his arms, his embrace conveying what words could not: gratitude, love, and the promise of a future brighter than either of them had dared to hope for. "When you knocked on my door that snowy night," he murmured against her hair, "you brought more than bread. You brought hope back into our lives." Abigail leaned into his embrace, watching as Emma played contentedly at their feet. "And you gave me a home and a family when I thought I'd lost my chance at both." As twilight deepened around them, Nathan marveled at how life could change so completely. Just a year ago, he had been drowning in grief, struggling to care for his daughter alone. Now, with Abigail by his side and another child on the way, the ranch was thriving, and so were they. The Montana wilderness was still harsh and unforgiving, the ranching life still filled with challenges. But they faced it together now, two souls who had found each other against the odds, building a love as enduring as the mountains that surrounded them. When their son was born on a cold December night, they named him Samuel, after Abigail's father. Emma, now nearly 2, approached her baby brother with solemn curiosity that soon blossomed into fierce protectiveness. Years passed, and the Adams ranch grew prosperous. Abigail eventually did teach, but not in a grand city school. She taught their children and others from neighboring homesteads in a small schoolhouse Nathan built on their property. Their family expanded to include 2 more children, twins Sarah and James, completing their circle of love. On the 10th anniversary of the night Abigail had first knocked on Nathan's door, they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children play in the golden light of sunset. Nathan wrapped his arm around his wife's waist, pulling her close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Not taking that teaching position in Helena?" Abigail turned to him, her eyes reflecting the same love that had grown steadily between them over the years. "Not for a single moment," she answered. "Some journeys lead us exactly where we're meant to be, even when it's not where we thought we were going." Nathan kissed her then, Beneath the vast Montana sky, grateful beyond words for the woman who had brought bread and hope to his door on that snowy night so long ago, and stayed to build a life filled with love,